PhD program at Trent University. He oversees the cultural component of the program. He is a member of the Michi Saagig of Curve Lake First Nation. Doug was one of the first graduates of Indigenous Studies at Trent in 1972. He is very much interested in how the ongoing study of Indigenous knowledge is applied at the community level. Doug is a pipe carrier, a sweat lodge keeper, and a ceremony leader. He considers himself a trapper, a hunter, a fisher, and a warrior. Doug's expertise is in the field of study of Indigenous knowledge, traditional Ojibwe ceremonies, traditional environment knowledge, and oral history. He is a fluent speaker of the Ojibwe language and is knowledgeable about First Nations place names of the area. Please join me in welcoming Douglas Williams.
I hate these things. Okay, first of all, I want to do something. We should really first speak to creation. That's within our culture. That's the first thing we do. We recognize creation. And so we want to give thanks to creation for us being here. The very fact that we were able to get up and come here. Right? And particularly based on what has happened to Michael, it's kind of apropos that we give an extra thanks to creation that we're here. So miigwech to Shwamanago. Now I'm going to put this away. I cannot speak with this in my hand, okay?
I'm sure you can hear me, right? Okay. Now, I'm really pleased to be here. These names here remind me of high school days. And I recognize some faces. Maybe you don't recognize me anymore, but I recognize your faces. And I know quite a few of you, so it's really kind of good for me to come and spend a little bit of time with you because, we forget to do that sometimes. It's a fast-paced world, and we just kind of get on our cars and go and do whatever we have to do. So we just don't give ourselves time to meet each other and to spend a little time together. So it's really good for me to see you. And, hopefully what I say to you whatever I say to you, I hope you can sort of mull it over. There may be some instances where we would agree to disagree, because I do come from a different background. Remember, I come from a different culture. And it's really sometimes maybe a little hard to understand each other. There are things, I remember when I first came to high school back here in Lakefield in 1957, I got bussed in. One of the first classes from Curve Lake to be bussed in. The government had wanted to kind of teach us how to live in the Canadian bigger system, right? So they decided to integrate us to Lakefield. That's you. Here we come, And I was shy. I didn't understand the outside culture too well. And what horrified me was the disrespect of the teacher by the grade 9 class. I just could not understand it. I go home, I go, gee, Gran, I don't know what these people, I think it's just they don't respect the teacher. This is the old grade 9 class I was put into in Lakefield High School. And there's a whole story surrounding that and so on, but I got to grow into it. I got to do well in school. I picked up that language. I was raised with the Ojibwe language up to the time I was 6 years old. Then suddenly I had to learn English. And so, by the time you're 14, you're kind of struggling with English, and you're partly forgetting the Ojibwe. And, it was a kind of an interesting time for me, but we struggled through it. Here we are today. We're now getting older. We're wiser. You're all still good looking. So what I thought I would do would be, I know you're kind of local historians, and I kind of like local history also, and I know a little bit about it and so on. I know we have May Wheaton here. In case I struggle, May is particularly thorough in what she knows about local history and so on. And I admire her work and so on. And she of course produced a history of Curve Lake back in 19...
Back in the 70s.
Oh, in the 70s, she wrote a really interesting one. I sometimes wonder why they haven't republished that. I don't know where that is. And whether or not Curve Lake ever considered. They were the publisher, weren't they? Curve Lake as a band council originally. And so on, but it has a lot of information. I was actually looking at it again, just so that I would sort of kind of get to know a little bit more of what I think I know, kind of try and remember what to tell you. So I'm going to do more, not necessarily a local history thing. Hopefully you can invite me back and we'll kind of jump into more local stuff. I just want to kind of prepare you a little bit about who the Mississauga people are, and also tell you a little bit about Ontario history, which you didn't learn from high school. I know that because I know I've taken part in curriculum development and that kind of stuff. I know what you learned and didn't learn, and it's the same thing with me. I have to kind of go out there and learn about my history. Other than what was taught to me by my own people. Right? So I'm going to do that. It should, I don't know how much time we got. I suppose as long as it takes.
Yeah.
I brought an extra tape. I bought an extra tape though.
And you got food also? What do? Do you leave room for a little bit of food at the end of your meeting? Or do you do that? I know Keeman must have brought something. But, okay. You know the land bridge idea. I'm sure you're kind of familiar with that. You read National Geographic and you watch TV and so on. It tells you basically that we came through the land bridge into North America, and then we peopled North America way back when, right? I mean, there are dates that the archaeologists kind of throw around and so on. And the one that they're particularly in agreement with right now is about 15 to about maybe 16, 17,000 years ago is when this happened. And then they started peopling North America. But there are archaeological evidences of people being in North America even earlier than that, right? There's an archaeological site in Brazil which dates to 48,000 years ago, right? How that got people, I don't know. I'm not here to explain that kind of stuff, and I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an Anishinaabe, right? Meaning basically, we're the people. I don't know who you are. We can joke, right? But Anishinaabe means the people, right? So what we believe in, of course, it's always debatable, right? And everybody has their own beliefs, and our beliefs are better than your beliefs. But we believe that we were created here. It's actually in our stories that we were created here in North America. And we were created at the mouth of the big river, which we think is the St. Lawrence River. And we were created on an island at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. And that ever since then, a first fire was lit, right? One fire was lit as a sign or a symbol of an era. So we started to walk or journey westward. We're on a westward migration. Okay? I don't want to bore you with our culture too much and so on. Just a quick sort of hit here in terms of that we are different in terms of the way we explain stuff sometimes. And I think that if we're different to that extent, I think it's just a simple way of, simply we should just understand that. That's what I mean by we should agree to disagree, right? in that kind of respect. Because science versus other stories, and there are reams of other stories around the world, sometimes gets us into trouble. Like, I don't want to push a certain ideology, because your religion may speak to you differently about how you got here. And I don't want to challenge that, and surely you don't want to challenge mine. But it's there, and so on, the differences are there. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to simply, as I go and tell the story of how we people Ontario, I'll just sort of take to one side a little bit and explain what, say, the Mississaugas, who we are as Mississauga and Anishinaabe, and so on. I'll explain a little bit about that, and how we find ourselves here today in Curve Lake, right? So I'll go from the first peopling of Ontario, basically, then I'll get to about the 1800s when Curve Lake got here. So you'll understand that part of it. And then you'll invite me back if you ever do. Maybe a year from now, and then we'll take it to the more modern era, and we'll bring May on. May had spoken to you, I guess, maybe a while back. I understand. But she spoke to you specifically about the Weetum family and how they came to be and so on. And I would have loved to have been here and listened to that. Not to try and trip her up. I'm kind of mad at her that she's here. I know that she knows more than I do. So anyway, I asked for this because I want to draw a map of Ontario, and I'm really good at this.
Right
underneath you. Did I hide it? You want it in red or black? So if we've got, I can go on and on. We're going to be, make sure somebody goes, Doug, you've gone too far. Okay, Ontario. Can you all see this? I kind of maybe can bring it up here somewhere. Is that better? Well, you're really watching me, aren't you? Maybe I should draw the face of Neil sitting over there. That'd be Ontario. Okay. Please, hopefully that doesn't look too foul. There's Bruce Peninsula here. So that's sort of like Lake St. Clair, right? Goes around here, Troy. Then there's Lake Erie. I am so bad at drawing. And then, you didn't notice, right? But this doesn't go that way. The Niagara River actually goes north, doesn't it? You do. You know that. You thought, I'm going to watch that old geezer. So it goes like this. Lake Ontario goes like this. And then the big river. Right? Then somewhere around here is Lake Simcoe. Right? And then there's rivers that flow into Lake Ontario. I'm not telling you anything new. But the peopling of Ontario before contact, who was the first white man to be here? Who?
Champlain.
That's correct. What year?
That's 16 something. 1640.
Somebody said 1615. Yeah. But the first one here was 1615. Okay, what was happening just prior to 1615 was Ontario was kind of people interestingly, right? And you've heard of these people, you've heard of the Hurons, right? What are the Hurons? The Hurons mainly peopled around Lake Simcoe. This is Simcoe. They peopled and some of the base of Bruce over here. So they peopled this area. right? Basically, like so. Like so. That's the Huron. Then there's people that were like the Hurons that were here. The most interesting for me, and the one that I'm really reading about lately, are what we call the neutral people, right? And the neutrals, they were at the end of Lake Ontario, in here. Did I draw this right? I think so. And a little bit along the north shore of Lake Erie, like that. And they went just to the Niagara River. Right? So they're the neutrals. We'll just put an in there. Then there are interesting people on the south shore of Lake Erie, in here, like so, and they're called the Erie. I don't know why they call it the Erie. You often wonder, I wonder too, you know, they painted their face, and if you met up with somebody with a painted face, you go, that's not like me, kind of weird, you know. And maybe if they go boo to you, you go, oh, well then that's Erie, right? I don't know. Then they had an interesting group of people over in here, just beside the Huron, in here. Remember, I'm not really touching the shoreline too much. These were agricultural people. They grew a lot of corn in here. And they also went, these people in combination with it, they lived together. They were neighbors in here. And they're called the platoons, right? Or tobacco. They would have really made some good money today. These are the platoons. Now, what was happening when Champlain came in, right? These people numbered about 20,000, right? These people here, the neutrals, numbered about almost that. These were less, maybe 12,000. The Erie, they don't really know. We think they numbered about the same, probably, about 10 to 15,000 people. So living in here are maybe 50 to 60,000 people in southern Ontario, right? South of here, of course, in here, and up to the river and like this are the Five Nations, right? The Iroquois, the feared Iroquois live down here. Now, when Champlain came through, Champlain brought something. What would Champlain have brought?
Disease or something.
And liquor.
Viruses, bacteria, cholera. Cholera. So, 1615, he went through. Some people caught the viruses. There was a slight pandemic. They could tell that, the archaeologists could tell that by looking at the bones. Right? So when he came through, there was some of this problem. He went back to Quebec. Then he went on back to France. Anybody know why he went back to France? This is real gossip. Really gossip. He went back to France I think that was the second winter. He went back to France because he was in love with the King's Secretary's 12-year-old daughter. And he went to marry her. Right? Today we're horrified, but in those days it's probably common. So that's what I got on Champlain. Wait till you hear what I have on others. Okay, so he went back, but he had a troop of people with him, right? Remember, there was a sort of an entourage of people traveling through and so on. He had with him a bunch of Frenchmen, right? He left them at Quebec City. There was a Frenchman then there, ahead of those guys, you know, and his name was Etienne Brulé. You've heard of Etienne Brulé. Well, Etienne could not forget about these beautiful Huron women that winter. So he starts to come back. And he was instructed not to. He comes back and lives with the Huron, right? Then he really contaminates those people with the other viruses, like smallpox was starting to appear around the world so there's a pandemic happened. Now I have to kind of look at my notes here. So 1615, the next bunch then to come in after Etienne went through. They think that he's the first white man to see Niagara Falls, by the way, and so on. But I don't want to lose track here. There's these soon follow the missionary, right? You got to win souls, you got to change the culture, blah, 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 you know. I don't want to get too much into that. They started their village when? See, I knew that I'd come over and give you some of these dates. You put them in with your local history, right? 1634, they came. They had some viruses, right? Like I'm not BSing you. You know how it works nowadays. Like we try to keep people with viruses away from, if they get sick somewhere else, if they originate somewhere else, we say, how are we going to keep these people out of here? You know, we do this kind of stuff. Well, Urania, by 1641, right? 1641 was reduced by 50%. That's how many people died within that period of time of 7 years. Right? 7 years. A lot of people died. Now, things began to happen really quickly and really fast. Prior to the introduction of those diseases, these people were what some anthropologists call friendly warriors. Right? They fought with each other, here and there, skirmished a lot. Right? The Iroquois loved to adopt anyone that they beat in war, right? So that they would raise their numbers. Right? And they had a whole process to do that. So as soon as they weakened, and because of their strength here, they didn't weaken. They didn't get viruses, by the way, because the French, when the French moved in here, didn't go this far. And they didn't interact with these people that much. Right? You know? So they were kind of relatively okay for now. You know? But these people in here were really like moved back and forth. Well, where are the Mississaugas? Where are us, Ojibwe? Mississauga is really a name that only signified us as where we were physically, right? We're called the Mississauga Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe really is the main word, means the people, like I told you. And you would call us the Ojibwe, right? And the Ojibwe occupied the shoreline. And what was interesting was that, like, we lived around the shoreline. And we lived the north shore of Lake Ontario, right here, and up the rivers. That was our territory. Doesn't look as fancy as this, or this, and so on. And we lived along the shores of Lake Huron. We call these people Chippewas, and so on. That was our territory. Now, that did not impress the historians. We weren't hardly ever written about. Go and look for information on Mississauga. You won't find that much. Go and look for information on Huron, you'll find all kinds of it. Because the people as they come in, particularly the French, the first thing they asked was, what village are you from? See, they understood village living. What do you grow? Corn. If they walked up to Mississauga, where do you live? Where's your village? Oh, sometimes here, sometimes there, over here, maybe there. The Frenchmen would go, and it's kind of, you know. So they weren't that interested in us, you know. And they'll say, what do you grow? We don't grow nothing. We go fish, right? We poach. We're just not interesting, right? We're just not interesting to the French people. Same with the English, same thing. Same thing. Because of their cultural background, this is the way they think. Maybe today that's the way you think. I don't know. I don't want to make too much judgment. But so on. So, well, these are in history books explained differently. When they started to flex their muscles down there, we are nowhere to be found in this part of Ontario, right? According to the story. When these people disappeared, and that happened rather quickly. Rather quickly it happened that the 1648, the Iroquois finished off the Huron. 1648. And 1649, the Petuns went the very next year. The Neutrals, they were kind of a neat people right in here, and they were next to the Seneca, which were the most warlike of the Iroquois right here. We had trouble with the Senecas, right? We had trouble with them. I'll tell you about it here a little later, about when I talk about portages. The Neutrals took about 3 years to get rid of, from 1647 to 1650. Right? And then, because they're flexing their muscles, and the Mississaugas and Anishinaabe Ojibwe people were really, didn't want the problem. They saw the sickness, we simply paddle back. Right? And we get punished for that historically. Right? Meaning that people say, well, it's not Mississauga territory because you were never here. We just simply paddle back. So by 1653, Ontario, southern Ontario is empty. It's as quiet as that. Right? There's nobody here. They're either all dead of diseases, or the Iroquois came along and finished everybody off, except us. We just sort of paddled. And we gathered up here somewhere. Then, there's this old chief from Hiawatha, Potash, right? Robert Potash told the story of how all Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Mississaugas, Chippewa people gathered up here and said, okay, let's go and kick the Iroquois out. Right? So they started moving back. And to the extent where later in the 1800s, when there are these meetings with the governor in Toronto, the Senecas are complaining that the Mississaugas are beating them up. Is there any Haudenosaunee Iroquois people here tonight? We still fear the Nodaway, we call them. When I was growing up as a kid, the way to shut me up would be to say, Northwest coming. That's it. We never spoke again all night. We still have a little bit of that, right? Eh? But let me just get quickly, I know I'm running into your time now. Let me tell you about something that you probably would be interested in. Right, and so as you drive down the road, you go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? This was a heavily traded area. Like there's trade routes all over the place, portages all over the place, and it's mainly for one thing, right, that created it. It's tobacco. We still have all kinds of people coming to Curve Lake today. Canoe, airplane, helicopter. Yeah. Tobacco. This is natural Mishnah tobacco. You can look at it. I prayed for Michael this morning. We use tobacco as a medium to pray with. We particularly believe that tobacco is a special plant, a special herb with special powers to induce a greater communication with the spiritual. So I did go out into the behind my place and I prayed for you. I prayed for Michael. That is, we now believe that he's on a different journey. He's on a journey. You know, we don't, Nishnabak don't, you know, it's not a final thing, and I'm sure it's probably the same for you, that there is life after death, and that's really consoling. It consoles me. And so I pray that he has a good journey.
What kind of tobacco is it, did you say?
That's natural old tobacco. I called it Nishnabed. I use Nishnabed, so that's means us.
Okay.
It's our, yeah. It's the platoons, the ones I talk about here. Their sole purpose was to grow tobacco for all of North America. Believe it or not, right? And they have partners down in Virginia. You know, you've heard of Virginia tobacco. But they were then also, their sole purpose there was also to grow tobacco. And they were the best growers of tobacco. They produced the best. They were able to cure it the best and so on. And all of North America knew it. And that's why a lot of people would come to get tobacco off these people. And they would come from all over the place, right? So there was a portage, right, from Toronto to Lake Simcoe, called the Toronto Portage. Toronto is an old Huron word meaning portage. This side over here was called Toronto, and this side over here was called Toronto. There's two Torontos. And that was a major rub, because if you took this, you would eliminate pedaling all the way down through, including tripping around Niagara Falls, right? Niagara Falls was also major. There's also major portage. And I remember I mentioned about the Senecas. The portage was on the east side, right here. That's where the Senecas lived. The unfriendly Senecas, right? And the Mississaugas were on this side of the river, right? So, you know, like, typically we go, you know, just kind of rubbed each other the wrong way. But every time we took the portage, they would beat us up. But they would beat up our families. You think the Mohawks are strong? I better be careful what I say. If you ever get the Mississaugas together, the Mohawks wouldn't stand a chance. They would not. So what happened, one of the things that happened was, whenever we had trouble, Like, remember when we were up here? We had a special group of young men we called the Ashkiwiwininawa, which is probably the first commando fighters in North America. If you gave us trouble, we'd give you the Ashkiwiwininawa. Right? They're the ones who jumped out of the leaves and killed you and disappeared back in with your body. They were sent to deal with the Senecas. That's why the Seneca had a meeting in Toronto with Governor John Graves Simcoe in about 1839. We're complaining. Stop those guys. Because it suddenly dawned on them after so many years of losing their people that it's the Mississaugas that are doing it. Right? So we had this kind of special characteristic. We don't have today, by the way. You can freely come to Curve Lake. The Ashbeer and Inouye live in Scooga. And they work at the casino. So anyway, okay. You can see we can talk forever. You know, we're only at 1653. The Ojibwe started coming back in again. But one of the things that happened that really turned the tide over here against the Hurons. The Hurons could handle the Iroquois down here really reasonably well. The Neutrals were these beautiful people who built palisades. They were beautiful physically. They had good food. They ate really the right oils. Like they were really what we call the sunflower seed oil people. They had beautiful hair. They knew how to fix their hair beautifully and so on. And these people though were suddenly at a disadvantage because what's happening down here in the 13 colonies, remember the 13 colonies down here? What was happening down here is that there's a lot of animosity between the French and the English, right? They were going broke fighting each other, by the way. You know? People were going broke in England. I mean, some of the Strickland sisters come from a father who went bankrupt, right? You know, there's a lot of things happening here. Well, in order for the English to gain control over in this area, which the French had control of, right, they gave rifles to the Iroquois. Who did that? Come and speak to me. No. They gave in 1648, somebody down there gave the Iroquois 800 rifles. Somebody gave them 800 rifles. That's what turned this tide here, right? The rifle thing. Then they started killing each other instead of capturing each other and adopting each other, which was the practice of these people. Right? So with disease, that problem, and so on, like I said, by 1653, it's empty. These people start coming back down. They were Mississaugas. Right? The history books will tell you that we got back down here by 1750, but actually it wasn't that long. That's like 100 years now. Probably more like we were away 20 years, right? Or we were coming paddling down here, seeing what was going on, saw Nottawa down here, back up here, right? Because we were highly mobile. These were agricultural people. We were the hunters. Remember, we're the killers. Don't get us mad. Really, seriously. We knew how to track you. We knew how to come to you. We knew how to disappear into the bush. We didn't have a home or a palisade to protect. Right? We were dangerous. So but suddenly one day we got our act together, and now, we are now own Ontario. Pardon me, oh yeah, I forgot about you. Forgot about you a little bit. Well, okay, so we're getting into the 1700 time. Better stop me if. Okay, we're into. Do you like this? I mean, am I
Yeah.
kind of going the right way? Because there's a lot of. Like I said, you don't get this in local history. You have to kind of go to university to get this. That's what happened to me. You know? And then so now into the 1700s. 1700s was sometimes kind of described by some writers as sort of the golden age of the Ojibwe in Ontario. Right? There's not too much problems, and the pandemics had passed. The beavers were returning and plentiful and so on. And everything was going along. They missed their Huron neighbors. They used to live with the Hurons even during the wintertime, and they're, like I said, symbiotic. They lived together. So, but come the 1700s, Ontario was pretty well placid and beautiful for the Ojibwe. Until something was happening down in the U.S. again. Right? The 13 colonies were flexing. Man, we want to get... So, what happened, and this is a big date, is around 1763, and you've all heard about it. The British people, after defeating the French just before that, right? It's probably your ancestors, some of your young men probably. Shame on you. No, I'm kidding. But by 1763, the British, who are now controlling Ontario, made a proclamation, right? A proclamation. Said, and the English were very proclamatarian oriented. You know, they love to read, you know, hear ye, we now therefore take control of this land, and if you don't move within a certain period of time, and the Mississaugas just went. But anyway, that's what happened, was all of a sudden we had this proclamation. The proclamation said, okay, 13 colonies, which of course the British were in control of, right? The king said, you cannot go into Indian country without our permission. And they drew a line. And the line was basically the Appalachian Mountains, some of Quebec, you know, and right down the Appalachians and so on. Anybody in the 13 colonies could not go west of that without permission. Right? And they made a deal with all of the native nations at Niagara Falls. They had this big 4-day meeting, and everybody came from all over the place because Niagara Falls was well known to everybody. That was the center of the world. Like if you said to somebody in Barons River, Manitoba, we'll meet in Niagara Falls, they would know about it. They'd paddle down here. And, you know, 4 good men in a canoe would go 4-5 miles an hour, right? They would get, they'd travel, they say about 80 miles a day, right? That's pretty fast. So anyway, everybody met in 1763. The British said, we will protect you from anybody. Well, that's what caused the problems down in the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies, of course, said, are you kidding? We're going there, whether you like it or not. Then that friction started, right? And there was raids, there was problems. And eventually, then pretty soon, there was the American Revolution. The American Revolution gave the Americans the right to go west of the Appalachians. You get the picture now, right? They're now coming. They're coming. They're coming. And the Brits, I'm not sure how hard they tried to protect Indian territory, but they did. Right? We did. We even threw our Ashkirun and our commandos into the American Ohio particularly. We sent some of our men down there. Right? And it was quite a while before the Americans recognized that our men were actually taking their young men from behind the lines. And they thought that they were absconding, absent without leave, and so on, but actually they were being, there were 70 Mississauga warriors that went down there. You probably heard the number 70. I'm talking May here, but actually it was 70, but they were sent behind the lines, right? So a lot happened in and around after the proclamation, and after the Americans got their independence, right, their independence. And you know, pretty well the rest of the story is kind of the way you were told it, right? So the Americans now, of course, are still coming after us. Finished that off with the War of 1812. So I'm going to be very fast here. So the next major time period, of course, was the War of 1812. Then after that, you know, the present boundaries of U.S. and Canada were formed in around about that time. Right? And the Americans, they had God on their side. The Canadians, you didn't. No, I'm kidding. But you know how the Americans are. I mean, they really thoroughly believe they're right. Right? That they are right. And, you know, when they started the march out westward, that was another big disappearance of our people, right? You know, they got rid of the Shawnee. You've heard of the Shawnee of Ohio. They numbered even more than the Hurons. Try and find a Shawnee today. Seriously. Right? So there's a lot of that stuff going on. They figured there's over 1 million people were gotten rid of by the U.S. Army once they jumped the Appalachian Mountains, come this way. Right? You know the story of Tecumseh? Tecumseh went up and down the Mississippi trying to get his fellow people to kind of, let's fight the Americans. Because they said, if the Americans win, we're going to lose everything. Right? And so on. And, but anyway, he was beaten. He was, they caught up to him at London, basically around London, Ontario. And, the Americans had jumped the border, got rid of him, and went back and stayed across the border. Now, there are other things that happened in the 1700s. There was an Odawa chief. Odawa means another sort of Ojibwe subgroup of people who lived around Manitoulin Island. And they were great trading people. And that was what they were good at, right? They would trade all over. They would paddle all over and so on. They had a great leader called Pontiac. Right? When the British were guarding the Appalachian line, right? And they had forts, like Fort Pitt, right? It was one of those forts, and so on, right? What happened at Fort Pitt, by the way, when the Americans first took Fort Pitt, right away they introduced smallpox blankets to the Indians that were living in around the periphery. Right? That spread. That was another pandemic that happened. But Pontiac, going back to Pontiac, Pontiac was a great chief, and he was a war chief. Now, with Anishinaabe Ojibwe people, they're not warlike, believe it or not. They're very peace-loving people. They love you to death. Right? You know, but they have to protect themselves. They have to, right? So the odd time they would get up and do something about the situation. Pontiac got the brilliant idea he's going to make a stand. And he's going to start with the British, right? And the British were, meanwhile, guarding against the Americans, right? coming up over the Appalachians, and there now we got Pontiac coming at them from this side. Now Pontiac is a really good war tactician. Like he could beat anybody. He was really strong. He was a big man. He was a leader. He could beat anybody in North America, and so on. And he did that with the British. He had them holed up at Fort Detroit. I don't know what. Yeah, what's the new name for Fort Detroit? That's the French name. It was called Fort. I'm forgetting. You know the one I mean. Yeah. So he had them holed up there for about a year. But you know, like I said, they're not warlike. They're highly efficient hunters. They're not agriculturalists. They cannot sustain occupation. He had to leave. He had to go back to his family. And he did that. Then he knew the weakness. Then the next year he gathered the Shemada Ojibwe again, and come back at the British again, hold them up again. But he brought his families along. Right? But yet the first winter was a bad winter. And he had to go back again. Right? Thanks to that situation, it was never an uprising, as some people call it, never happened again. Pontiac is really symbolic of that anti-colonial type warrior who said, I'm going to make a stand and I'm going to knock the heck out of those British people. But here you are today, folks. Okay, 1812. We can remember stories, direct stories from this, and something like that. And when I come back to you, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you one right now. My great-grandfather, 7 generations, they gave him the English name of William Taylor the First. Born in 1790 on Buckhorn Lake somewhere, on an island, he said. The reason I know this is because he's written up about in the Christian Guardian. The Christian Guardian was a very strong paper in Ontario that was written by missionaries, because there's a lot of them. And they wrote about common things, like it was a newspaper, and they gave us some good news. So they wrote about him, and he was 110 years old. So this is around 1900. They're writing about, the Christian Guardian is writing about him, and he's remembering the War of 1812. See? That's how come we know about the 70 warriors who went behind enemy lines. And, he told those stories, right? This old man. This is the old man that had 4 wives. So you could see what I'm like the way I am today. So anyway, that's beside the point, I guess. The missionary said to him, William, you better get rid of those wives. You can only keep one. Right? So he thought. He said, no, I like them all. He had 2 wives in Curve Lake and 2 wives in Hiawatha. How do you do that?
A few miles apart.
He had a canoe at Bridgenorth and a canoe at Little Lake. And he made sure the Chemung Portage stayed open all the time. They say that when he would run the portage, and they said when you get up over the hill at Bridgenorth, right, you have the swamp, because it's basically following Chemung Road. But that was full of, in tundra you have the roots, right? The roots come up, and they sort of in the way, and you sink between the roots and so on. And they say that all you'd hear him, he's a big man, he had 4 wives, he was committed to the relationship in Curve Lake, and he had to get back, he'd be tripping on those roots, right? So by the time he got to Curve Lake, he said he was a really washed up old guy, who was just full of bruises. Right? we're doing genealogy in Curve Lake, and he's the William the First. I don't know his Anishinaabe name. I'd like to know. One of the problems we're having is that prior to 1830, our people are signing with their Anishinaabe name, Ojibwe name, and then after 1830, they're signing with their English name, right? You know, and they were registered in there somewhere with their English name. So we can't connect with the English name with the old name. They just didn't do it, right? I wish they had done that, you know. Because I know they said to William, "What's your name?" You know, British people, right? They always have a pad. "What's your name?" After they've read their declaration, their proclamation. "What's your name?" So he says, "Oh, that sounds like William." Okay. After the War of 1812, Anishinaabe became somewhat diminished in terms of a military force. Right? Before that, the colonial governments kind of looked at them as an ally and so on. After 1812, they're starting to be looked on as a liability. Right? Then we start to have interesting writings going on. There was writings starting to happen around Lakefield. And Lady Graves Simcoe was writing about the people around Toronto and around Kingston and so on, and those books are available to you. And she was describing our people as not very nice people, not very nice words that she was using. Same with the one that went all over the place. Brown. Maybe. But anyway, she was also describing our people as, you know, the usual stuff. They're hanging around, they're dirty looking, they're drunk, and so on. This is when this started, after 1812. This is when this kind of thing started. And it's still, you can hear it the odd time, even yet. In 1829, after a treaty was signed, we all know about the treaty in 1818, that's when the British government decided to make a deal with the local people that then settlement can occur. The very next year, the settlement occurred around November of 1818. The next year, 1819, surveyors moved. And then they graded Ontario. I really like what they did, by the way. Because it's just going to happen. That's what I'm thinking. But one of the things they did, which I really like, was when they gridded Ontario, and so on, basically in that kind of way, once in a while they would save one of these for a crown visit. Right? Remember that? Then there's people started complaining. Those are full of wolves and Indians. Right? And that was one of the starts of the rebellion in Toronto, because they wanted, that was one of the triggers, not all of the triggers, but that was one of the triggers that created the rebellion of 1837. Right? Believe it or not. The Mississaugas were living around Toronto even yet. And we were, as settlement was occurring, after 1818, they started to survey. We were in the way. We had to move away from our traditional territory, which is the North Shore of Lake Ontario. We had to come this way. hence Rice Lake was Hiawatha, Scugog Island, Curve Lake, right? And then there was this little place by Quinte called Grape Island. They retained one island in traditional character. Well, that didn't work. They were moved to Aldergrove near Rosemead, right? So there's no Mississaugas along the traditional lakeshore area. And the reason why we're at the lakeshore is very simple, is the salmon, the Atlantic salmon. Our people describe the days like William, right, was describing born in the 1790s, all the fish that were at the mouths of those rivers. And if you read Gillett, Edmund Gillett, when our people moved away, the settlers took over the fishing. They were catching, there's one article, and you can read it with Gillett, 30,000 whitefish caught in a net strung out at Coburg and at Niagara. They brought the 30,000 fish and used them as fertilizer. Seriously, that's in Gillett. That's not Doug Williams' story. You know? So there's a lot of disappearance of fish. The biggest disappearance was the Atlantic salmon. I think they got weakened by this kind of fishing, and then the virus came in and wiped them out. Like if you read again Strickland, Susanna Moody, when she left the Peterborough, came on the portage on this side of the river to Nelson Falls. She said they stopped at Nelson Falls and fished for their lunch. And she said the whole area was full of salmon. The salmon used to come up here on these rivers and go right up to Stony Lake. And the Atlantic salmon is really an amazing fish that's different than the Pacific salmon, because the Atlantic salmon goes back. It doesn't die in the upper reaches of the river. It goes back. So it was plentiful. You could walk across these rivers when the salmon made it here, but then it disappeared. You know? I don't know whether our old people wished that. Sometimes I go, they were so powerful spiritually, they may have go, well, okay, if we can't be there, we wish upon anybody who's there, those salmon to disappear. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder, I really wonder about this. I don't know. Okay. It's 8:30, folks. I'm going to stop this kind of stuff. I was going to, I thought, geez, I'm going to bore them with this stuff. And I said, okay, we'll do the place name stuff quickly. Right? We'll do the place name stuff. And I'm sure you wonder, where are these place names coming from and so on? Where did Shimon come from? What else do you wonder about? There's all kinds of place names.
Scugog.
Oh. Who said Scugog? Oh, please.
Paula loves it.
Oh, there's a good one, eh?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. That's a good one. Like, in my wisdom, in my conniving wisdom, I got a student to do place name paper.
Good, so you got a paper.
But then she gave me too much information. Like, I don't know how to decipher this stuff. I mean, it's just amazing what she was able to dig up. Scugog apparently is a corruption of the word, which is a big word, low water, boggy water, right? And she goes on like 3 pages of this stuff in here, of trying to explain from books what this kind of stuff meant. The Otonabee River, that's an interesting one. There's always root words in the language, right? The root word in Otonabee, believe it or not, is day. Odanabe, right? Not autonomy, Odanabe. The da is heart. And if anything is boiling, we add, prefix, suffix to it to mean boiling water, right? Or boiling heart, beating of the heart. You know the connection, because it looks like it's empty, right? And that's what autonomy means. And people have debated that, and I let them debate it, I hear it, and so on. But that's what our people call it. Odanabe is the way you say it. The French river is Skatte-Ijuet. 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 That means shallow running river.
What's it for?
Yeah, shallow running river. Sakate. Sakate. I don't know how you spell these. I'm not. I know I speak the language, but I'm not like I never was trained to phonetically spell that. So, and they now have a system of working with these words. They call it the double vowel system. And even with that, I find it really hard to know. We still.
Squawknagasipi is another one.
Oh, that's.
I think that's Indian, isn't it?
That is Indian River, right? And I don't ask me to translate that. I'm really poor, ain't I?
Yeah.
I'm just sort of going, oh yeah, let's find something here, what I'm trying to find for you, which you might be interested in, is, and I should have marked it in here, is Stony Lake
In Cachawanuka.
in Quechuanuca. And Quechuanuca simply means where the water goes over something. They always say that it means the beginning of the rapids, right? But actually it means where the water goes over something. It's like a waterfall. So you could say, well, that's a beginning waterfall.
You're going to tell us Stony Lake.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. I should have marked it. I should have marked it. I should have done this. See how much of a good researcher I am. They just love me at Trent. Just a minute, students. I'll find it. And next week I'll come back with the. One of the interesting things that happen in the area, and you'll find it throughout the language, is that our people, and it also continued with the Hurons, right? They would burn. They had these burns of certain areas, and they would have fields or meadows where they would burn every year, and then there would be special plants that would come up with this burn. And it was, in fact, became a little prairie in the middle of Ontario deciduous forests, right? The big one was the south shore of Rice Lake. All of that area was burnt, right from Gore's Landing all the way to the far end, right? And that's what they call Rice Lake, is Bimid-Kuteon, right? Meaning burning plains that move. And you can see why they're doing that. They would have to start at this end, right? And start making fire and so on. So that's the name of Rice Lake. And you can find it in books and so on. Lakefield. Where's Lynn? What do they call Lakefield in the language? They call it Mashkute. You recognize a Mishkute? And the book that you wrote went Tiber, right? Slight mistake. Mishkude, which is a plain, this would have been somewhere here, there would have been a plain. Kibel means at the shore. That's what Lakefield was called. Peterborough would also have been a Mishkude, but they would specifically would have had a name for Peterborough too, but we've lost that. That's why it was called Scots Plains in the beginning. I would think the settlers, when they came up, they saw this beautiful savanna. It's nice and green. There's these beautiful grasses that grow in these plains. They have these tall grass, prairie grasses. Then they have these Indian grass, they call it. You know, they'll only grow in these places because when the burn occurs, that's the only surviving root there is. It burns off everything else. And certain trees survive this. The pine could survive it, and the black oaks could survive it. So you had these beautiful manicured meadows we call Mishkude. Yeah, and they had them all over. And the last vestige of a Mishkude in Ontario is at Alderville. The last vestige of the Carolinian forest is at Six Nations. And you know why? Because we don't develop. We stalled somehow, beautifully stalled. So we, by default, we kept the last vestige of these plains. Fox Island was one, and we made a big mistake of planning on it. And I'm guilty of that. It was actually a Mishkude. You could see the old grasses there.
Were any of the lakes like Chemung and Ketchiwanuka and Stony and that in existence before the people came and started damming up the waterways?
That's a good question, because some of those lakes were really heavily dammed, like 6 feet is a general rise. So if you omit the Lakefield Dam, Ketchiwanuka would not be there, really. You know, it would just be our little river, particularly in the summer, right? And the engineers complain about that, by the way, when again, you'll find in Gillett where the engineers are writing to the government and they get paid these nice little sums of money to come along here and figure out where the dam should be and the canals and so on, and they write all about it and so on. And one good thing about it, though, is that they describe the lakes with our names. That's one of the ways that we're able to keep some of the names. Like Shimon, Washkamuk. Right? That's the name of Shimon. That means, translated, mud lake. But actually, I hate that translation. It should be like Black Earth Lake. It was a mud flat. And our people talk about days when the whooping crane dropped in on Shimon. And they dropped in at the south end of the lake. And our people at the north end of the lake heard the whooping crane call every morning. You can hear whooping crane call for 20 miles with a squawk. Every Indian jumped up and said, "What was that?"
Doug, one of the early surveyors, Wilmot, Wilmot Creek down at Bowmanville is named after him and so on. But he came to Lakefield in the spring, and he came to Lakefield in the fall, and the water was 15 feet higher in the spring than it was in the fall. So like you say, after the runoff, Ketchiwanuka just be a trickling stream.
Same with the Trent River. You know, that's why you have these portages, like you have the Percy portage at the far end of Rice Lake, goes on to Coburg. You know, that's a big portage. The one at Coburg follows from Gores Bay to Coburg. That was another big portage. They almost made that the canal, by the way. They started digging because the local people have said, if we start digging, you know, they won't have the canal over by Hastings. Seriously, just read it in Gillett. It's in there. All the stuff people wanted, the canal. See? They started digging. And a lot of the people, when they first settled here, followed the Cobar Portage, the Gore's Landing Portage, right? And then skipped the lake at Rice Lake and come on up to Peterborough. The Shimong Portage was a big portage, huge. I mean, that was heavily used. Then there was a portage from the west side of Rice Lake, jumped over to Scugog. Can you imagine carrying a canoe that far? The biggest one, remember I was telling you about the people who traded tobacco? There was a portage from Barrie, right? And caught the Nottawasaga River coming like this. And it split over here and went into this country, right? In order to trade tobacco. Right? There's roads that follow that today. I don't know what highways it goes on and so on. And Nottawasaga means Nottawa, that's our word for Iroquois. Saga means water or river. Nottawasaga River. So in other words, if you were to translate it, you go, Nottawa River. But anyway, so these portages went all over the place. There was Highway 2 was basically an Ojibwe animal trail because there's a lot of migration of animals. They don't want to swim. And so on. So there was Rice Lake over here, and the Talbot Portage, of course, which is well known, the Gore's Landing Portage, the Percy Boone Portage, what else is there? The Shimon one, which is here somewhere, right? And there's lots of them. There was another one that went all the way through here of Ontario to the Thames River, right? Met the Thames River down there. Now, interesting thing about this one is that John Graves Simcoe, very arrogant Englishman, loved to dress in the old English style with fancy hats, high collar, so on, nice boots, you know. And John Graves Simcoe's woman, Mrs. Simcoe, also loved to dress up, right? But they also liked to tour. They liked to go around these portages and check it all out and so on. Because they had nothing else to do. Anyway, he got taken by a Mohawk on this portage and got lost. By the fourth day, he's freaking out. All his party, he's freaking out. He's mad, right? Lucky for him, a Mississauga came along and saved him. Give me the name of that Mississauga.
Hero.
So, lucky we saved John Graves Simcoe for you, right? He named Lake Simcoe after himself. He was so pitifully arrogant. And then he would give islands away. He would, as he's going along, they say that he had the scribes, and every word was written down, and he would say, it was very, very colonial. And he'd say, see that island there, Tom? Okay, I'll name it after you. And they would actually write it down. So there was, as he went along, there's names of people that I don't know, which, like, Lake Simcoe is called Shunya Saagig. Shunya Saagig, meaning silver, right? That's what we call money today. Shunya. I don't have any shunya. Is there any question? Maybe we should slow down here a little bit. It's kind of warm in here.
I don't get by there. Go ahead.
Do you want to speak about the Williams Treaty? What year exactly was that? And that was,
You know what we should do with the Williams Treaty, because it's a whole topic.
yeah.
Can we come back and talk about that someday? Because it's only fair, I think, for them to explain the whole content of that treaty, because it's so complex. And there's a lot of political moves that were made, and then it's self-made as a treaty. I think that's a good idea that we talk about. So you understand it from our perspective sometimes, and I think we have a pretty good understanding of it now. And I could show you some letters that were written and that kind of stuff as to the way our people looked at it and so on, you know. So I think, is that fair to say?
Very interesting.
Okay then, thank you very much. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
meeting with you. That's good. Oh, that's
Thank you
good.
again.
All right.
Please all join us for tea and cookies. Everyone's welcome, and I hope you have a very good summer.